Good evening. Welcome to Matinee Free Webinar. Today we have two eminent speakers, Mr. Matt and Mr. Ray, both are from USA. And they are dealing with the emotional intelligence for the last 30 years. And Mr. Ray is a teacher of Mr. Matt, and unfortunately, we are all running for emotional intelligence, but it's a very important thing, even something more than IQ. So today we are dealing with EQ and positive mental health for teens, teenage people. Last time we are running for kids. Now today we run for teens. So let me welcome both Mr. Ray and Mr. Matt for this wonderful session on EQ and particularly for teens. So you are welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Like I said, we appreciate you letting us talk about this. It's the most important subject on the planet, in my opinion, in our opinion. And we know a little bit about it, and we're going to try and share with you some of the things that we've learned or made up or tested or tried. We've been working with people for a long time, and so we're trying to give you some of the benefit of our experience. So I hope it's helpful. Ray was a teacher, a specific teacher for middle school kids for 100 years, right? And so in speaking to these guys, teens and preteens, that you got to be super clear and super simple and real and very, very real, because they'll tell you if you're not being real, right? And so he made some great strides in that area. Do you want to say hello, Ray, and then I'll do my part, and you can then do your
go
part.
ahead. Just go ahead and do that, and I'll wait. I'll just,
okay.
Let me say I was a health education teacher, and part of that was sex education. So, and I did that for 33 years. They were 14-year-olds, and when I retired from in order to do that job better, I became trained in rational emotive behavioral therapy and education, REBT and REBE. And when I retired from the classroom, I began representing the Chicago Institute for REBT as a mental health educator. And I've been speaking and presenting to state, national, and sometimes even international, like this, conferences for people, teachers, students, and mental health professionals. So that's it.
Impressive. Cool. I didn't know you were a health teacher. That's cool. And sex ed. So yeah, that changes it slightly.
Well, that's going to play into this a little bit here. I had to dust the cobwebs off of my sex ed mind here to get ready for this presentation.
There you go. Great. Okay. All right. Cool. Well, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and let's see what I want to start from scratch, because just briefly, because some people might be watching this for the first time and don't know what positive mental health is. And so I'm going to give you some of the basics, and then Ray's going to dive in a little bit. So let me do that. Here we go. So today we're going to do it a little bit different, though. I'm going to do it a little bit different. I'm going to introduce you to positive mental health, how it starts with emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence, it's EQ. We don't know very much about our right brain, our emotions. We know some about our thoughts because we're left brain societies mostly, but we don't know that much about our right brain, about our creativity and our emotions, our passion, our senses, etc. We don't talk much about them. We don't deal with them much. And that's a bad thing. That's a bad thing. We're finding that this is incredibly important, much more important than we ever imagined. And so that's what we're doing here. We're not really saying that it's more important than IQ, than our left brain. We need both. We need balance. We need balance badly. And since we know some about our left brain and we don't know much about our right brain, it's out of balance. It's out of balance. And we're trying to balance it by increasing our right brain. So, and this time we're going to do it a little different, in that we're going to discuss specific challenges that teens may face. This is what Ray's going to be talking about. and the positive mental health tools that can help in each of those areas. So we're going to go by challenge, by age. We're in age groups by teens, and we are going to do it by specific subjects as well. So that's a little bit different this time, and we'll see how that goes. I think it's going to be very powerful. And then at the end, we'd like for you to try it, practice it, model it, learn it, share it, please, because like I said, nobody knows about this stuff. It's not very complicated. It's not anything, it's not rocket science, but it's so important, and nobody talks about it. So we need to. 3 super simple basic steps to positive mental health. Awareness first. We got to be aware first. We then, right? We can't do anything until we're aware of what's going on. We don't have any idea until we're aware. Then acceptance. It doesn't seem like that big a deal, but it is. It's a huge deal, is to accept what we're feeling, because a lot of people are in denial, and they push away, and they try to stuff it and hide it and all that stuff, because they don't even accept themselves. A lot of people are afraid of their own fear. They're afraid of their own body, of their own feelings. And that's a horrible situation. That's a horrible feeling, to be afraid of your own self. And so if you can accept what's happening inside of you, you are basically accepting yourself, which is a very big deal. And then lastly, or not lastly, but once you're aware and you accept, then you can take some action or not on your thoughts and feelings. You can take some conscious reaction, not reaction, but response. React or respond, not react, which means that you put a little bit of thought in it, that you have some awareness and you have some intelligence about what's going on inside of you. And so then you can do something about it. So you were responding, you're not just reacting and to the first thing that happens to you. So, and no action is an action. No action is a very real action. And with high emotions, it's a very good idea sometimes to not do anything. Take no action. Shut your mouth. Don't do it. Don't hit them. Don't run. Don't. Just stay. Just be cool, right? No action's a good action sometimes. So know that too. And the good news about that is that whether you take action or you decide not to take action, you are deciding. You are in charge. You're in charge of you. So this is the very good news, big deal, super important. And people that don't know this are actually kind of, not only do I kind of feel sorry for them, but they're actually kind of dangerous. Actually, it can happen that people don't know about themselves and don't know how they're to respond, and they just react, and it can be dangerous, literally. So that's part of why we're jumping up and down about it here. So let's try very quick. I always start off with this feeling check-in. The first 2 steps, awareness and acceptance, we can do right now in just a couple seconds. What are you feeling? And will you accept that? Right? What are you feeling? And will you accept that? Here's some words, some terms. You can feel more than one thing at a time. We call it name it to tame it, because it feels better to know what the heck's going on inside of us, at least to ourselves, and to be able to describe to someone else. So if you can identify your feelings, that really helps for a first step. Here's how we do it with kids sometimes. We're real simple. One of the most powerful teaching tools we've found, very, very powerful, is this silly little exercise. What are you feeling? Teachers stop during the day and go, hey, so what are you guys feeling? Each one, go around the room, one word. What are you feeling? And that gives awareness, acceptance, validation, confirmation, connection, because other people are feeling the same thing, and you go, oh, wow, I'm not alone with this. That's a very, very big deal with people. We are social critters, and we love to be this kind of the same, to fit in with other people, to belong. It's one of the, on Maslow's hierarchy, right up there, is we need to belong. And so if we go, hey, I'm feeling the same as 2 or 3 other people in the class, how cool is that? I'm not alone. I'm not broken. I'm not an alien. I'm not have some huge disorder. I'm just have a feeling. Okay, that's okay. Same like everybody else. So what, and it's what are you feeling, not how are you feeling. There's nothing wrong with it, but how are you feeling usually gives you a physical response rather than a feeling word. So try that. So once you identify what you're feeling, you know that you're in charge. You are in charge of you. No matter what happens outside of you, you get to think and feel whatever you want every time. Nobody makes you angry. Nobody hurts your feelings. They don't. You do that. And that's good news. That's really, really good news, because that means that whatever's happening, you're in charge of you and you can manage yourself. And that's what we're going to be talking about, some of the specifics on that today. So emotional intelligence is the concepts and language and skills to understand. And then positive mental health is, what do we do about it? It's the strategies to put it to use. And so we're going to dig into that today. Positive mental health is about dealing with our negatives. A big part of it is, not all of it, but a big part of it is, how do we deal with our negatives so that we can create more positives, right? So if we are feeling fear and anger and sadness, some of the big three, I call them, then we can, if we know how to manage those and we're not afraid of them and we understand them and we understand ourselves and we appreciate ourselves and accept ourselves and let ourselves feel sometimes some of those negatives, we can actually create more positives. So you notice this little graphic becomes like a smile. And so we're turning that frown upside down. That's what we're doing. Transforming. We can transform our negative feelings into positives. And the purpose of all of this is peace. This is our nonprofit. It's called EQ4PEACE. And we're trying to flow this from emotional intelligence, which first we learn about emotional intelligence. And then one of the first lessons is emotional responsibility. Your thoughts and your feelings are yours, right? You made them, you created them, you can manage them. And that's very good news. If you agree with that, if you know that you made you, or you're in charge of you could do some amazing things, and up you go. If not, warning, be careful, because you're heading down. That means you become a whiner and a blamer and a victim, and they did it to me, and it's the world, and it's my teacher, and it's the society and the economy and all this stuff. No, it's not. It's you. And that's good news. It's you. That's good news. So positive mental health is the tools to make that happen, or using emotional intelligence tools, the strategies for making that happen. We're looking to try and create peace inside of ourselves, between us and among us. And someday, maybe, when enough of us know how to create peace, maybe we can have very real peace in the world. So that's our theory. We'll see what happens. That's what we're working with. So I added this little section this morning. I thought this was kind of fun. I've been doing this stuff for a while. So I like hashtags. I'm not that smart, and I'm on my left side. So I need stuff simple, short, and powerful, I think. And hashtags do that. So here we go. Positive mental health by hashtag. Awareness, acceptance, action or no action is first, right? We get thoughts, feelings, decisions, and actions. Those are the four main components of positive mental health. And so those are what we have control over. We have total control over, right? Right? Remember that. And EQ rocks, one of my favorite ones. It does. EQ is fantastic. So the big three for positive mental health are name it to tame it, which is becoming aware of our thoughts and feelings, positive and negative, just like I was doing before. What are you feeling? That's name it to tame it, right? Spin it to win it, which is changing your negative thoughts into positives that we can do. And feel it to heal it is letting go of our negative feelings so that we can have more positive feelings. So I did a little drill down on these today. So name it to tame it is becoming aware. All of them too, not just your positives, but both your positives and negatives. So it's very important that you know about you and you're aware of you. They don't stop ever until you do. Until you do. They're happening 24/7, 365, every second of every day for the rest of our days. So maybe it might be a fairly interesting subject, probably the most practical subject on the planet, in my opinion. So get good at it. Get good at naming them and identifying your feelings so that at least you make sense to you. But here's a little side thing. Hint, don't get stuck there. Some people, left brainers, people are uncomfortable with their feelings. They get stuck on, what do I call this? What is this? What's going on inside of me? And they get all stuck in that. Sometimes it doesn't matter. Sometimes it doesn't matter. You don't have to name it in order to deal with it, right? You don't have to name it in order to deal with it. It's a good idea, but you don't have to. So you can feel it anyway. So it doesn't make that much difference what it's called. Plus, there's no way to validate it specifically, because if you call it anxiety or you call it embarrassment or something, maybe somebody else calls it something else. It doesn't make any difference. It's only that you understand yourself. Okay, so that's name it to tame it. Spin it to win it. The second one is knowing that you is acceptance, right? The first one was awareness. This one's acceptance. Accepting responsibility for your thoughts and feelings. No one can make you think or feel anything, nothing, without your permission. Nobody makes you angry. Nobody hurts your feelings. It's you. And that's good, right? And accept that since you made them, you can remake them. Whatever you thought or felt, right? And you can change it. You can adjust it and make it something different. So this is kind of the IQ of your EQ, if you will, of your positive mental health. It's our left brain being able to understand what's going on with our thoughts so that we can change them, which changes our feelings often. And lastly, feel it to heal it is about letting go. This is one of my big things, is that I feel like that one of the best possible ways that you can deal with your feelings is to actually feel them, which is very unusual in talking about emotional intelligence. Hardly anybody talks about actually feeling them. Shocker, right? But you actually feel them, because, as my mentor, Doc Downing, says, negative feelings expressed as intensely as they are felt in your body will reduce in intensity and are free to change. It's a beautiful thing, right? Expressed as intensely as they're felt in your body. Sometimes, right? Cry, scream, growl, tense, push, stomp, dance, sing, write something, right? Let it flow and then let it go. Another one I like in there: get in, get it out, and then get on, right? Be creative and ask your body what it needs in order to release. Your body will. Thank you for letting it feel what it needs to feel. Kind of like going to the bathroom. If you need to go and you don't go, it's pretty uncomfortable. Same thing with your feelings. They get stuck in there and they want to come out. And so let them out, not on anybody, just out of you. So release, replace, rejoice, let it go. Fill up that space with the positive feelings, and then you pat yourself on the back for doing a great job. All right. A couple more: positive thoughts, positive feelings, positive actions. And then I slid in positive parenting. I'm doing 2 workshops next week on positive parenting, brand new, pretty cool concept. And we're trying to pass it on. We're saying that's the most important job you will ever have, is parenting, ever. So it's pretty important. A couple of positive ones are purposeful positivity. Try saying that real quickly. Purposeful positivity, and that just means do it on purpose, and it also means for a purpose, right? You are actually creating positivity in your life on purpose, which is a beautiful thing and puts you also in control of you. Exaggerate enthusiasm, as you can say. That's one of my specialties. That's one of the things I enjoy doing. So I'm enthusiastic. I want other people to be enthusiastic. Rubs off a little bit, hopefully, and it feels good. It's fun. And then exercise optimism as opposed to pessimism. Try being positive. Try being hopeful and feeling good about you in the future. So, all right, fast. Here we go. All right, Ray's up. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Ray's going to start doing his, and off we go. Thanks for listening. Go.
Share. Let me go back to the beginning here. Slideshow. From beginning. There you go. Okay, little miscommunication. I added late teen and early adult years. That's what so it's applying the principles and practices of positive mental health to mental and emotional struggles of late teen and early adult years. There's so much overlap. It's not like it ends at one point, begins at another. Now, I tried to come up with some of the challenges of those years. And one would be college and you could say school for teenagers. Career, what you're going to do in the future. Relationships are a challenge. Sex, what kind of role sex is going to play in your life. Sexual orientation is a challenge for many. And then finances as you get older and older. Now, I also looked at some of the emotional struggles. There's anxiety, depression, shame and guilt, loneliness. And a lot of people are talking about loneliness now since the pandemic, where people have been isolated. Problems that can arise, addiction, that can start very early, unplanned pregnancy, same thing, sexually transmitted diseases. There's a lot of poor eating habits, which later lead to some problems like obesity and all kinds of other health problems. And of course, suicide is unfortunately very high among kids and especially college-age kids. Now, why I take a tool approach, regardless of what you're trying to fix or build, there's only a limited number of tools that can be brought to bear on any project, whether it be fixing a car or building a house or fixing somebody's mental and emotional health and trying to build a better life for themselves. The trick is knowing what tool is called for and getting good at using them. Now, these are some of the tools I've developed. Number one is understand and appreciate the role emotion plays in everyday life. Unconditional self-acceptance, that's a term that Dr. Albert Ellis used. Unconditional other acceptance, UOA. Developing an internal locus of control. Recognizing irrational thinking in yourself and others. I've developed something I call a think, feel, do thermostat model. I'm going to show you that. 7 would be challenging and correcting irrational thinking, and either in yourself or others. Recognizing when you have mistaken goals. That's the term from Rudolf Dreikers, talked about mistaken goals that students have in classrooms. And number 9 is a simple way to evaluate thoughts, feelings, and actions in a non-judgmental way. And finally, understanding why change, it should be why change is hard and what it takes. Now, these tools are a mix of the 3 steps that Matt talks about, PMH, awareness, acceptance, and action. Now, I believe that people can and will do much to help themselves if given the right tools and shown how to use them. That's been my experience as a teacher. Now, so let's start with college and career. In American politics, they always talk about managing expectations. Well, that's what getting ready for college and a career is all about, managing expectations. And that would be for school, high school, for kids, athletics. And the reason is because expectation, there's a quote from William Shakespeare, expectation is the root of all heartache. Now, some of the factors that can elevate expectations, parental expectations, where they come right out and say what they want from a child or a teenager or a young adult. Those I would call overt. Sometimes simply what parents value, which would be more covert. For example, I'm a teacher, so my daughter can sense that I value education, and that might affect some of her expectations of herself. Now, you can also have parents that are hard acts to follow. For example, doctors, lawyers, bank presidents, PhDs. You can also have successful siblings or parents. And prior success can also elevate expectations. And sometimes that can be what I call a kiss of death. The more successful somebody becomes, the more likely they are to start to struggle as time goes by. And then eventually a high cost of college. When you start to approach college, if you're paying all this money, then there's the expectation you should be doing well. Now, what happens here is shame. Shame comes from believing you're not living up to expectations, either your own or others or your own. Now, believing you're being told you're not living up to expectations gets perceived as a threat to what we call the symbolic self. Now, the symbolic self is that person someone wants to be and be seen as by others. Now, a perceived threat, and this is a key point, a perceived threat to the symbolic self, like something going wrong in your life, gets treated the same as one to life and limb by the brain. And it's one of many ways that people manufacture threats where they don't or need not exist, or magnify ones that do or might out of proportion to reality. And because of that, they generate more emotion than is necessarily helpful, because emotion is energy to move to help us deal with threats and get what we want and need. Now, shame is also connected to anxiety, because if you believe you haven't lived up to expectations in the past and you aren't now, it's easier to imagine you might not in the future. Now, so kids at school age, either high school or college, they're probably under a lot of stress. They would say they're under a lot of stress. Well, stress is really anxiety. And I think it's helpful to know a couple of things about anxiety. It's a figment of imagination. What we mean by that is it's about things that could happen, but haven't yet, and many times often never do. We worry about a lot of things that never come to pass. Now, there's a formula for anxiety. It's called catastrophize plus awfulize. First, you imagine something bad happening, and you tell yourself, if that happens, it'll be awful and terrible and the end of the world. Because if you said, so what, who cares? It's not that big a deal. You wouldn't have anxiety. You might have some concern, but not anxiety. And anxiety tends to come from making demands of ourself or sometimes life. You can make demands of others, yourself, or life, and anxiety tends to come from making demands of ourselves before some life event occurs. Now, one of the rules that I teach is we all have the right to want whatever we want. And wanting things can motivate us to do great things. Now, what happens though is people will take what I call a think, feel, do thermostat. And if you want something, there's always a possibility you might not get it. So there'd be some concern about not turning out the way you'd like it to or not getting what you want. But if you elevate that up to thinking it's a need in your life, it's a necessity, and demanding that of yourself or life, and start saying, I have to do this or I can't do that, then you're more likely to generate anxiety. So really by where you set your think thermostat will determine whether you have simply some concern or calm, or you end up with anxiety. Now, and the reason that happens is because the greater the difference between your expectation and reality, the greater the perceived threat will be, and therefore the more emotion you'll automatically generate. We're hardwired to do that. Now, so by setting your thermostat at have to, or converse of that can't, like I can't fail this test, you set yourself up to generate anxiety, and that's part of what we call fight or flight response. The other half is anger, which would be the fight half of it. Now, how anxiety prepares performance, because a lot of times anxiety will do that. If you plug into fight, you have the urge to flee the situation you find yourself in. And if you have this overwhelming urge to flee, it's hard to function at the level you're capable of or want to when you have that overwhelming urge. Now, the other thing we talk about is shoulding on others, yourself, and life, basically using the verb should. Now, if you should on others, you tend to create a lot of anger, like they should listen to me, they should do what I tell them to, and of course they don't. If you should on yourself, you might say, I should be doing better, I should have better grades, I should, shouldn't have done that, and you generate shame or guilt. And if you should on life, you can generate depression. For example, this shouldn't be happening to me, I shouldn't have to deal with this. Now, what we try to do is encourage people to turn it down a notch from shooting on yourself to just simply wishing, I wish I had, or I wish I was, or I wish I hadn't done that. And then you'll experience some helpful emotions, regret and remorse, which gives you some energy to move, to try to make things better, but not so much that you react or overreact to life or what's happening. Now, so, where did I go backwards here? Oh, there we go. Now, what happens is people can get into a vicious cycle of before something happens, they'll tell themselves they have to and generate anxiety. And after something happens, they'll should on themselves and generate shame and guilt. And of course, if you generate shame and guilt, then the next time around, you're more likely to think you have to do this better than before. And then if it doesn't, you'll have more anxiety, which may impair your performance. And the next thing you know, you're not doing well, and then you're shitting on yourself again. It becomes a real vicious cycle. Now, one of the simple principles I always taught my students was behavior starts and continues because it serves a purpose. That's a basic psychological principle. Now, sometimes people have what we call mistaken goals. It means you get something out of what you do, but it makes getting what you really want less likely in the long run. Now, two common mistaken goals that we deal with, one's called withdrawal, avoidance, relief. The other is avoidance of failure. And what it means, you simply seek to withdraw from or avoid some unpleasantness or some overwhelming challenge and get relief from the feelings that tend to go with it. Now, so how all this can play out, the shame and anxiety? Well, you have kids, for example, turning to performance-enhancing drugs, either in sports or sometimes even in academics. they turn to alcohol and drugs to get relief from the shame and guilt and anxiety. They might shut down or even drop out. Sometimes in athletics, I was an athletic trainer for a long time, and I used to see a lot of injuries occur when kids were under a lot of stress. And one of the things, you know, in a weird way, having an injury lowers expectations, so it gives them some relief. And of course, unfortunately, we have a very high rate of suicide among college-age students, and to some extent with high school students too. Now, the other thing you might see with school is cheating. And there's a simple rule we teach. When people start to think they need something they simply want, it can make otherwise smart people do stupid things. They get desperate, basically, because they think they need to do well in school. The other rule we teach is behavior intended to satisfy a perceived need will win out over behavior intended to satisfy a rational preference. For example, it's a rational preference to not want to get caught cheating, to not want to fail a class, to not want to get kicked out of school. But if somebody thinks I need to pass this test, I need to get a good grade, I can't fail this test, I can't let my parents down, they might very well be more likely to cheat, regardless of what the consequences might be. Now, so one of the things we do, one of the tools we try to encourage people to have is choose to see whatever they think, feel, say, or do as part of being human and understandable given what your life experience have been so far and what you have to deal with at the moment. We call that unconditional self-acceptance, or USA. Now, the other thing we try to do is try to get people to turn their think thermostat down from have to down to simply want to, okay? Now, and the way we do this is pose some very simple questions. Somebody says, I have to do this, why do you have to? You have to or just want to? And hopefully they learn to realize that the only answers to that are, I don't have to, I don't have to, I just want to, I don't have to do anything. I remember my grandfather taught me this many years ago. He used to always say, you don't have to do anything except die and pay taxes. And he was half right. Okay. Now, where you really want to set your think thermostat, having a visual like this can be very helpful to kids. You want to set your think thermostat right at the top of that section for want to or don't want to. Where you really want to do something. As soon as you creep into that upper level where you start thinking you have to do something, things can start to break down and start to spiral downwardly. And you see this a lot with professional athletes. I've seen many, for example, my team, the Chicago Cubs, there were a lot of pitchers who got really big contracts after they had really great years. And next thing you know, they're just spiraling downhill. And next thing you know, they're not even in majors anymore. Now, another technique we teach for anxiety is called staying in the now. Okay, you basically try to practice saying to yourself, whenever you feel anxious, that might happen, but it hasn't happened yet because anxiety is a figment of imagination. And if it does, I'll deal with it, just like others do, just like I see others do, just like I have other things in the past. And that's called staying in the now. And it's surprisingly effective if you make that, practice and rehearse that enough so it becomes automatic. It can really short circuit anxiety very well. I use it myself. The other thing we encourage people to do is stop shitting on yourself. Okay, and sometimes you'll see people wear shirts that say, I'm not going to shit on myself today. Now, so basically we're trying to get you to turn just down a notch. Okay, down from should or have to, or to I wish I had or I wish I hadn't. And instead of experiencing shame or guilt, which can cause people to overreact to life, it'll generate regret and remorse, and still you'll still be free to respond in the best possible way. Now, we also teach and encourage them to develop what we call an internal locus of control. And it's basically based on this simple formula for feelings. Event plus thoughts equals feelings, okay? Everything other people say or do is just an event. And what it tells us, it's really your thoughts about events that cause feelings, not the events themselves. And we also say, no one upsets you, you upset yourself. It's your choice how you want to feel. Now, and here's why an important fact of life. There's always more than one way to look at anything. Some ways will make you feel better, others worse. Some ways will make it easier to deal with what you don't like, others will make it harder. And you have all these choices. I call them cognitive choices. So we try to teach kids to remind themselves that it's my choice how I look at things, what meaning I attach to what happens, what I focus on. I can focus on some things in the mirror in the morning that depress the heck out of me, and other things not so bad. It's my choice who or what I compare things or myself to, what I remember at any given moment about the past, what I imagine will happen. And one of the big ones is what I expect of myself or others in life in the first place. And then finally, how much importance I attach to what does happen and what I spend my time thinking about. Now, part of developing an internal locus of control is to learn and remind yourself, what do you and don't you control? Now, you can't control what others think, feel, say, or do. Some people think they can and talk and act as if they can, but you really can't. If you're a teacher, you find that out very fast. They can think, feel, say, or do whatever they want to. There may be consequences, but if they're willing to live with those consequences, they can think, feel, say, or do whatever they want to. That's their choice. You only control what you think, feel, say, or do. That's your choice. Now, others can expect as little as much as they want from you. They have a right to want whatever they want. But ultimately, it's your choice what you want to expect of yourself. And that's very important. You have control over that. Sometimes people will say someone's putting pressure on them. Well, you can't really put pressure on somebody. The only way to put pressure on someone is to put your hand on them. Pressure really comes from inside. It's really anxiety. And it's ultimately determined by how much you expect of yourself. Now, here's some things I heard parents say to kids, or teachers say to kids, or coaches say to kids over the years. Make us proud. We watched Top Gun a lot, and there's one scene where the commander comes in and says, make us proud. Well, you can't make someone feel pride. What you do is just an event for them. It's their choice how they want to look at that. You could do a lot and they could choose to not feel proud. You could do very little and they could still choose to feel proud. Some parents are very happy with their child and proud of them regardless of what they do. Ultimately, it's their choice to feel pride or not. I always wanted to see some kids say, that's not my job. I can't do that. That's your job to choose to feel pride or not. Now, sometimes kids will also take responsibility for how their parents feel. I want to make them happy. Well, you can't make someone happy either. Because again, what you say or do is just an event for others. It's their choice how they want to look at it. You could do a lot and they could choose to not be happy. You could do very little and they could still choose to be happy. It's their choice to be happy or not. Or sometimes kids will say, I don't want to upset my parents. Well, again, what you do is just an event for them. It's their choice how they look at it. No one upsets them. They upset themselves. They can upset themselves as little or as much as they want to. You're not responsible for how they feel. They are. It's not your job to make them feel better. It's theirs. You've got enough to just make yourself feel good. You can't make them feel better. Okay. And the other thing I remember when I first started teaching back in the 70s, there was a program called Teacher Effectiveness Training and Parent Effectiveness Training, TET and PET. And one of the things I remember from that is they used to pose the question, whose problem is that? Okay. So if they're not proud of you, whose problem really is that? If they're not happy with you, whose problem really is that? Now, most kids will, well, that's my problem. No, it's not. It's their problem. If they get upset about what you do, perhaps needlessly, whose problem is that? Okay. Now, I'm going to skip now to relationships and sex and some of the mistakes people make. And largely it happens because of the two rules we teach. One is when people start to think they need things they simply want, it can make otherwise smart people do stupid things. Behavior intended to satisfy a perceived need will win out over behavior intended to satisfy a rational preference. Now, these are some of the things people start to think they need, which they really simply want, are nice to have. And I'll explain why I say that. Now, love, acceptance and approval, friends, a boyfriend or a girlfriend, even sex, or as they get a little older and get into their early adult years, to get married. Now, and the reason it can make people stupid is very simple. If you were suffocating, what would you be willing to do to get air? And of course, the answer would be anything. So suppose you start thinking you need love or someone in your life like you need air, water, or food. What might you be willing to get that or keep from losing it? And the answer is the same, anything. And that's how people can make mistakes and do some really stupid things. Now, loneliness is something people talk a lot about and something that plays a role in a lot of people's decisions. It's important points to make about loneliness. Loneliness does not come from being alone. Being alone is just an event. It's what someone thinks about being alone that determines if they feel lonely or not, and to what degree. For example, if I don't care to be with anybody, sometimes I don't. I go out and take pictures in the desert and I'm fine. I'm going to be indifferent to being around other people, content. On the other hand, once I start to want to be with somebody or have a relationship or whatever it is, then I might experience some loneliness if that can't be. But if I turn my think thermostat up to need and think I need to be with somebody and need to be in a relationship or need a boyfriend or girlfriend, and now I don't have one and I'm alone, now I'm more likely to have much more higher frequency, intensity, and duration of loneliness than I would otherwise. Now, and one of the important points about this, people can even equate things they want to air, water, and food in their own minds. And that makes not getting what they want or losing such things seem like suffocating, dying of thirst, or hunger. Now, sometimes people will have what we call a dire need for approval. We see that play out in a lot of ways where people will do anything to get the approval of other people. Now, we talk about mistaken goals. Loneliness tends to predispose someone to having the mistaken goal of attention. And sometimes they'll do anything to get attention. Sometimes the things they do make mistakes. We used to have a saying when I was a kid, negative attention is better than none at all. And sometimes that's what people will resort to. Loneliness is also one of many feelings that people can try to get relief from by drugs, alcohol, tobacco, and all kinds of other things, or doing what other people want them to. Now, and where you set your think thermostat makes a big difference in how much feeling or what type of feelings you'll have in other regards too. For example, if I want something, I'll have some concern because there's always a possibility I might not get it. If I don't get it, I might have some hurt, might have some sadness, but I'm still free to respond to life in the best possible way. But once I turn that thermostat up to need, now I'm more likely to feel anxiety about the possibility of not getting it or losing it. And the hurt would be much greater if I didn't get what I wanted or lost it. And I might be more prone to depression. And that would cause me to react or overreact to life. Now, so what do you really need? This is the way I tend to challenge it. You need air, water, and food. And the proof of that is you'll die in minutes, days, weeks without them. So are you going to die if you don't get these other things like love, acceptance, approval? People live their entire lives without as much love, acceptance, and approval as they would like. People live their entire lives. They could without sex. Not everybody does that, but some people can and do. Some people even choose celibacy. Now, so do you need these things like you need air, water, and food? Are you going to die if you don't get them? Okay. You need them or they're just nice to have. Now, one of the things I used to also talk about, it's a communication thing. It's called encoding and decoding. Now, one of the things that happens, especially because, we got males and females, and there's that old saying that women are from Venus and men are from Mars, which means there's a lot of differences between the sex. Now, people don't always let others know exactly what they want, often because they don't really know. And they often do what we call encode it, disguise it in some way. And then they have no control over how others decode what they say and do. And others don't always decode what they say and do in the ways they would like. The ways others decode things is influenced by their own desires, those people's own desires and perceived needs and history. For example, here's a very common thing. A girl might want a relationship. She wants guys to find her attractive, so she dresses in a revealing way. And then the guy decodes it by thinking he wants sex, and so he thinks she wants sex just like I do. And then it ends up being really confusing and complicating, and sometimes people get hurt. Now, so the important questions I've always encouraged kids to ask is, what do you really want? That's the most important question you have to first answer. Then your second question is obvious. How's it working for you to think, feel, say, or do what you are now? Is it helping you get what you want, or is that making it harder? And if you keep thinking, feeling, saying, and doing what you are now, are you likely to get what you really want in the future? Now, I also taught students that attitude is always the father of behavior. And one of the things I was taught as a teacher is to always pose the question, if their behavior could talk, what would it say? I've always believed that we have this whole body of slang terms out there regarding sex and females. I've listed a couple of them here. I mean, you could make a list, 30, 40 slang terms for sex, 30, 40 slang terms for female. And I think there's a lot to learn from slang, because if somebody uses slang to talk about sex or females, what does that tell you about their attitude toward those things? If their verbal behavior could talk, what's it say? Now, so another important question is to ask this. If someone else thinks, feels, says, or does that, talks that way, acts that way, are you likely to get what you want from them or with them? Are you likely to feel the way you'd like to with them? Now, the meanings people choose to attach to their life events is one of the many cognitive choices we have. And the meanings people attach are very, very important. Whether you're a teacher dealing with students' behavior, or if you're dealing with sex and love and all those kinds of things. Now, if two people attach the same meaning to sex, for example, there's no problem. Both could get what they really want. For example, if both think it means they're making love, they'll be fine. Even if they thought they were both doing the nasty, they'll still be fine. But when two people attach different meanings to the same event, someone's likely to not get what they want. For example, if a guy thinks he's just blanking and a girl thinks she's making love, she's probably going to come up short in getting what she wants. Now, there's a term that was popular for a long time in the college level and in high school too. It's called friends with benefits, meaning that people don't want to commit to any kind of serious relationship. They just want to be friends and have sex. Well, you know, that always concerned me. Like, is that really what you want? And are you really going to get what you want, what you're looking for that way? And, you know, then my students would often ask me, how are we supposed to know what's going on? How are we supposed to know what somebody else is thinking? Well, the best hope, I think, is I used to always tell them, be honest with yourself about what you want and what you're doing and what meaning you attach to it. And then more importantly, be honest with your partner. That's your best hope. People can deceive each other if they want to. Now, I made a list of some things that help decision-making. One is to access and act on helpful advice you've been given. For example, I taught sex ed. There's all kinds of things you teach people in a sex ed class that they might be able to access and act on that would help them make better decisions. It also helps to recall and learn from your own and others' past experience. For example, the fact that somebody had sex and then had an unwanted pregnancy or got used, found out they got used in the long run. Consider potential consequences before acting. Act in accordance with personal values and morals. And a lot of times people put those aside and then they regret it later. To deliberate or think things through before acting, and to tolerate delayed gratification. And some things you may have to wait for instead of wanting them right now. Now, my driver's ed teacher always taught me, when in doubt, go slow. I can still hear Mr. Fisher say, Mathis, when in doubt, go slow. Well, that's true in life too. When in doubt, go slow. And that's harder to do when you think you need something you simply want, because you're going to feel more desperate. Now, there's an old saying that girls use sex to get love and guys use love to get sex. And unfortunately, there is some truth to that. Now, the important point I think I used to try to make is you can't make someone love you by making love to them. In some ways, the term making love can be a real dangerous one, okay? Because sex is just an event for two people. And you can't control how someone else chooses to look at it or what meaning they attach, and whether, therefore, you can't control whether they'll end up feeling love for you or not. Now, some of the mistakes I think people make going into relationships is they think they can and should make another person happy, and their partner can and should do the same for them. And then if either ends up unhappy, they blame the other person. And I think that's why the divorce rate is so high, unfortunately. The reality is anything you do is just an event for them. It's their choice how they want to look at what you do or say. Thoughts cause feelings, not events. You could do a lot and be a really nice person and they could still be unhappy. It's their choice to be happy or not. No one can make another person happy. Now, because in the middle of this formula, there's all these cognitive choices that people have. How you look at what happens, meaning, what you compare things to, what you focus on, what you expect in the first place. Others can't control how we make those choices, and we can't control how they do. So therefore, we can't control whether somebody is happy or not. Now, it's nothing wrong with trying, but you have to always have that understanding that there's a limit on what control you have over whether they're happy or not. Now, the other thing that happens in relationships, people too often take what I call unnecessary responsibility for how people they care about make themselves feel. For example, a young girl might think, oh, I made my boyfriend mad. Oh, geez, he's so mad at me now. That puts them at a disadvantage in negotiating for what they want. And others sometimes will use that against them. Now, so the way to kind of reason your way through this is to go back to our formula. Whatever you say or do is just an event in their lives. It's their choice how they want to look at what you said or did. It's their choice how they want to feel. No one upsets them, they upset themselves. Now, we are responsible for what we say and do, but we're not responsible how they make themselves feel about it. Other people can upset themselves as much or as little as they want to. Now, I always think of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. I don't know if you're familiar with that old fairy tale. But if you think, I don't care how they feel, well, that's a little too little responsibility. If you think it's my fault they feel that way, that's too much. Just right would be something in the middle. Whatever they feel is part of being human, understandable, but it's their choice how they want to feel. Now, sexual misconduct came up a lot recently. We have something called the Me Too movement in the United States, because some famous people were accused of sexual misconduct, sexual assault, sexual abuse. Now, the way I explain it is people start to think they need sex instead of just wanting it. And when people think they need things they simply want, it can make otherwise smart people do stupid things. That's why you see some real famous people, assaulting people sexually. Behavior intended to satisfy perceived need will win out over behavior intended to satisfy rational preference. Okay. Now, very often there were a lot of discussions about sexual misconduct is really about power. Well, I tend to disagree with that. I think it really is about sex. They think they need sex like they need air, water, and food, and then they use their power to get the sex they think they need. And some people have, for example, Harvey Weinstein was a big producer. So he used his position to coerce people into having sex with him. Now, the last thing I think it's important to talk about regarding relationships and how your life plays out is that we all develop what I call ruts in our brains from practicing thoughts, feelings, and behaviors over the course of our life. And ruts make thoughts, feelings, and actions automatic. But ruts are also why people recreate their past and why their histories can sometimes become their destiny. Now, and that could be a good or bad thing, depending on what your history is and even what your parents' history is. Now, if your history has been troubled or your parents' history was troubled, perhaps they were fighting all the time, went through divorce, it's important to watch for signs that you are repeating or recreating your own past, okay? And sometimes people become aware of this. They'll say things like, you sound just like my father. You remind me of my dad, or you remind me of my mom. Okay, so sometimes they become aware of that, but it's very easy to slip into these ruts and end up recreating your past in some good and unhealthy ways. Now let's talk about switch to sexual orientation or gender identity. And a lot of kids are struggling with this. Right now in the United States, they're passing all kinds of laws in some states, that basically against people who are struggling with sexual orientation or gender identity. Now, LGBTQ individuals often struggle with shame. Remember, shame comes from believing they're not living up to expectations in some way. And that's often because in so many ways, LGBTQ plus people are told that they're not living up to somebody's expectations. So one of the things I would try to teach and encourage them is to have unconditional self-acceptance. Choose to see whatever you think, feel, say, or do as part of being human and understandable given what your life experience have been, which may have been much different than others, okay? Now, what I mean by part of being human is I would ask somebody, are you the first person in human history to be LGBTQ? Do you think you'll be the last? And of course, the answer to that is no. At any point in history, there's always been a certain percentage of people who were LGBTQ. And so you're always going to have a lot of company. And what does that suggest? Well, to me, it suggests being LGBTQ is part of being human. Now, why is that understandable? I would suggest, suppose we put other people through all the same exact life experience you've had. What would they probably think, feel, say, or do, or perhaps struggle with at this point in their life? Now, some might fare better, others worse, but most would probably think, feel, say, or do, or even struggle with the same things you do. Now, I also would encourage them to have unconditional other acceptance, which means choosing to see what others think, feel, say, or do, have in the past, might in the future, as also being part of human and understandable given what their life experiences have been, which may have been much different than your own. Now, you can still dislike or disagree with what others think, feel, say, or do, especially if they're bigoted in some way. It just helps temper your emotional response to what you don't like or disagree with. Now, it's human nature to upset ourselves about when others are critical of us or put us down in some way. But if you upset yourself, I would ask them the question, whose problem is that? So why do that to yourself? Whose problem is that? They're not the ones who are upset. You are. Now, I would also explain to kids that there's some basic human cognitive tendencies that cause some of the problems they have to deal with. One is that people have a natural innate tendency to note and attend to differences between themselves and other human beings, be it skin color or, in this case, sexual orientation. Now, they also have a tendency to generalize or often overgeneralize about things. For example, to make more out of something, to say somebody's a bad apple instead of just having a bruise in some way. And they also have a tendency to imagine threats where they don't exist. A lot of people in the United States right now are somehow perceiving transgender kids or LGBTQ people as a threat to them in some way. It's just nonsense. They're not. Now, it's part of being human, understandable to want others' acceptance and approval. But I would try to encourage them to realize that where they set their thing thermostat will make a big difference in how they end up feeling. For example, if they want, it's understandable to want someone's acceptance and approval, but if you don't get it, then you're going to be hurt or sad. But if you think you need it, perhaps you need air, water, and food, now that hurt's going to be much greater. For example, if you think you need your father or mother's approval and you turn out to be gay and they disapprove of you, now there's going to be a much greater hurt and you're going to be depressed instead of just sad. Now, ideally, if you could, it'd be nice if you could get down to don't care. Really don't care if other people accept or approve you. And that's tough for many people. Now, the way I challenge this again, if they think they need acceptance, approval, I challenge it pretty much the same way I talked about before. You need air, water, and food. You'll die in minutes, days, or weeks without them. Are you going to die if you don't get the acceptance and approval you would like from others? Do you need their acceptance and approval like you need air, water, or food? Do you need it, or would it just be nice to have? Do you need others' acceptance or approval, or just want it? Now, and again, I would pose the question, whose problem is it? Whose problem is it if others don't like or agree with who you are or what you are? Whose problem is it if others upset themselves about who you are or what you are? That's their problem, not yours, okay? Now, I also teach them what I call mental and emotional karate. It means defending yourself mentally, emotionally from the verbal attacks of others, just like we learn to defend ourselves in karate classes against physical attacks. Now, a big part of mental and emotional karate is developing an internal locus of control. Now, so again, we talk about what you do and don't have control over. You can't control what others think, feel, or say about you. They can think, feel, say whatever they want to about you. However, it's your choice how you want to look at and feel about yourself. Others can't control how you choose to look at yourself or feel about yourself. They don't have the power to control that. Now, we talk about self-image and self-esteem. Well, self-esteem is really how you feel about yourself. Self-image is how you choose to look at yourself. And then there's what other people think, feel, say about you. Well, really, it's the way you choose to look at yourself that determine how you feel about yourself. So your self-image determines your self-esteem. Now, so mental emotional karate, the way I would suggest, or the way I would want somebody to have what I call a black belt in mental emotional karate is for them to have an automatic response this way. You can think, feel, say whatever you want to about me. That's your choice. But it's my choice how I look at and feel about myself. And you don't get to make those choices for me unless I let you. And I choose not to. Now, if everybody had that automatic response to attacks by others, they'd be fine. Now, and also there's some other things, again, going back to this formula, that anything others say or do is just an event. Your thoughts about what they say really determine how you feel, not what they say. Thoughts cause feelings, not events. The reason I bring that up is because if we simply thought, I wish they wouldn't say things like that, and they did, you'd be hurt, perhaps frustrated, irritated, or annoyed, and you might be sad. But if you think they can't or shouldn't talk about me like that or say things like that about me, now it exacerbates the hurt. You're more likely to be angry and perhaps lash out in some way. Sometimes we see these or school shootings, for example, where a kid would come to school with a gun and start shooting people who've been attacking him and harassing him. And you're also more likely to be depressed instead of simply sad. Now, if you could get down to don't care, you'd be able to be calm or indifferent. Now, one of the ways you might challenge that is to ask them. If you say they can't say that about me, well, it'd be nice if they didn't, but why can't they? They can't, or you just don't want them to. And unfortunately, the only real correct answers are they can, I just don't want them to. They can think, feel, say, or do whatever they want to. Now, another thing that another part of think thermostat is there's 3 places you can set your think thermostat. One is to not care, think it's awful, unpleasant, inconvenient, uncomfortable, or awful. If you set it at unpleasant, well, it's unpleasant when they say those things and think those things about me. You're going to have some hurt, you're going to have some frustration, irritation, annoyance, and some sadness. But if you start to tell yourself, this is awful, like the worst possible thing that could happen to me, now the hurt's going to be exacerbated. You're going to be angry instead, perhaps lash out, or you're going to be more likely to be depressed instead of sad. Now, if you could get it down to don't care, then you could have calm or indifference. So the way we question this is just very simple. Is it awful or just unpleasant? And hopefully they learn to answer, it's not awful, it's just unpleasant. It's not that big a deal. It's not the end of the world. People have said worse. Now, one of the rules I also teach, you have a right to like or dislike whatever you want to. The mistake people make is to go from not liking something. If you don't like something, you might feel some hurt. You might be frustrated, irritated, annoyed, and sad. But they tell themselves, I can't stand this. And they exacerbate the hurt. Now more likely to be angry instead of just irritated. And they're more likely to be depressed instead of sad. So we want to try to turn it. Now, if they could turn it down to don't care, I don't care what people say, then you'd experience calm or indifference. Now, the way we question this is you can't stand it or just don't like it. And hopefully they learn the answer is I can stand it. I just don't like it. And that now, the last type of thinking that rational thinking identified by Dr. Albert Ellis was called label and damning. Okay, rather than simply disliking the behavior or your own behavior and being frustrated, irritated, annoyed, or having regret or remorse, people will label and damn others or themselves. They label and damn others, it tends to generate anger. Label and damn yourself, you tend to generate shame or guilt. So what we try to do is just get them to turn it down a notch to disliking a behavior. Or possibly, if you can get it, down to don't care. Now, so let's skip now to addictions and unhealthy eating and other life habits. And again, the principle here is behavior starts and continues because it serves a purpose. And one of the things I learned very early as a health teacher is the thing that so often gives purpose to using and abusing tobacco, alcohol, and drugs, or overeating and doing a whole bunch of other things, including suicide, is that people generate more emotion than is necessary or helpful in response to either their past or current life events. Now, and then that kind of causes them to plug in, because they have all this emotion, they're more likely to plug into the mistaken goal of withdrawal, avoidance, relief, to seek to withdraw from or avoid unpleasantness and get relief from the feelings that go with it. Now, and one of the problems with smoking, drinking, using drugs, or even overeating and indulging in favorite foods is they work. They give people temporary relief from the feelings they seek to get relief from. Now, and as long as these behaviors continue to serve a purpose, it would be difficult to stop engaging in them. Now, they will continue to serve a purpose as long as people continue to generate more emotion than is helpful or necessary. So the goal should be to try to generate a more functional amount of emotion, to bring their feel thermostat down. And the tools we use to do that are to teach unconditional self-acceptance, to teach and encourage them to have unconditional other acceptance, to develop an internal locus of control, to recognize irrational thinking in themselves. There's 4 basic types that Ellis identified, and to challenge and correct that irrational thinking, and then to have a step-by-step process or approach to any troubling life events. Dr. Ellis came up with a 5-step process, A, B, C, D, and E. Now, and I think it's also important to talk about why change is tough. To change the way you think, change the way you feel, change the way you act. Because we talked about ruts earlier. When we practice thoughts, feelings, or behaviors, we create ruts in our brain. And like real ruts, they are easy to slip into and hard to stay out of. And hard to get out of once you slip into it. And addictions are basically the product of ruts. Eating habits are basically a product of ruts. So ruts make thoughts, feelings, and behaviors automatic. Now the catch is once you create ruts, you can't get rid of them. You can only make new ones through practice and rehearsing new ways of thinking, feeling, saying, and doing things, and hope that they compete for use with the old ones. But the catch is you can, because you never get rid of these ruts, you can always slip into old ruts, and chances are you probably will. And I've heard people say over time in my life, you know, that once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic, or people sometimes will quit smoking for a long time and for whatever reason get stressed out and have 1 cigarette. Next thing you know, they're smoking 2 packs a day again, and their friends are all surprised that they're doing that, they're smoking again. Well, that's because of ruts. So we always have to compete with, we have to deal with ruts. And it helps, I think, to view it this way, that we have these ruts and we can't get rid of them, can always slip into them. And knowing this knowledge is part of having unconditional self and other acceptance. If my dad were, for example, when he was alive, if he were to go back to drinking, I would understand that because I know he has these ruts. And something happened, some big life event, and then he slips back into those old ruts. I'm more likely to be able to understand that and have unconditional other acceptance for him, or unconditional self-acceptance for myself if I make some mistakes and behave, think, feel, say, or do things the way I might have in the past. Okay, now I just want to mention real quick in passing, I'm almost done here. Crime. You know, crime has risen during the pandemic, and crime is a big issue in the United States right now. Politicians are using it as a political issue. Well, I think crime arises because people start to think they need things they simply want. And it can make otherwise smart people do stupid things and become desperate. And again, behavior intended to satisfy perceived need will tend to win out over behavior intended to satisfy rational preference. Nobody wants to end up in jail, but if they start thinking they need things they simply want, they start doing things like committing crimes, carjacking, breaking in, burglary, robbing a store or a bank. Now, in fact, some of the factors I think that exacerbate the problem is we have a growing and visible wealth inequity or disparity. And people can see other people riding around these fancy cars with fancy clothes, and meanwhile, they're struggling just to pay the bills. And that creates a bigger difference between expectations and reality. And that's why they get a lot of emotion, they get desperate. Advertising can contribute to this because it makes people be more likely to think they need things they simply would be nice to have. A sudden personal or societal economic downturn. Someone loses their job, somebody suddenly, their benefits or their income is cut down. And that suddenly creates a bigger difference between their expectations and reality. And having an external locus control is also another factor because they blame others for how they feel. So all these things can exacerbate the problem and contribute to crime. Okay, I'm done. Okay, so let me stop share here. We're all done. Back to Matt or Doctor if he's here.
Great. Wow.
Any...
Wow.
Yeah, a lot of stuff.
Well
I know.
done. Let me just do, I think I have 2 more slides if I could, please. Just note that your feelings matter. A lot of what Ray was talking about, your feelings and especially your beliefs about whether you need or want, whether you have to have it or you just want to have it. Those are thoughts and you can change those. That's spin it to win it, and they do matter. You give yourself permission to feel. That allows yourself to accept that part of your body and that part of your system, and knowing that you're okay with yourself. And that's the name of a book, a very famous book by Mark Brackett from the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. Highly recommend it. And the internal locus of control or emotional responsibility is the key to this whole thing. The whole thing, I think, would you agree, Ray? That was probably one of the basics of all that you're talking about, is to be able to adjust yourself, that you are in charge of you, that they're your thoughts, they're your feelings, they're your actions, they're your words, they're your beliefs, they're your awfulization, they're your, all of that stuff is you. And that, I call it emotional responsibility, and it's the key to all of this, in my opinion, our opinion. And that you are at choice, and that's good. That's part of the whole deal. So please reach out, talk to other people about this stuff. It's really important. People do not know this. They may have figured it out, and they may not. They may not, since we have to learn it in the school of hard knocks. We are not taught most of this stuff, and so we don't know, and we don't know that we don't know, and so most people don't. And so we need to tell them. It's our responsibility. Those of us who do know have to tell those who don't, in my opinion. So that's why we're here. So there we go. Any questions, concerns, complaints?
I just want to say one thing about internal locus of control. The vast majority of people walking the planet, I would think 99+% have an external locus of control. They wrongly see what other people say and do as the cause of how they feel. That causes them to generate all this unnecessary emotion, and we end up having more conflict, people suffering needlessly, sometimes people dying needlessly because of this. Just imagine if we could start teaching everyone on this planet to have an internal locus of control, how much difference that could make. You know, in intra peace, interpersonal peace, you know, international peace. I mean, it's just, everybody has right now is looking at it as that person makes me feel bad, therefore he's a threat to me. So sometimes I feel like lashing out. Just imagine if everybody just started saying, no, that's not the way it works. It's my choice how I want to feel. There's just so much potential there. It's just amazing. If there's one thing we could do for everybody in the world, it would be to teach them to have an internal locus of control. That would be my big goal.
Totally agree. Yep. And you were talking about the big lie. Tell them just a bit about the big lie.
The big lie is that other people make me feel bad. That's a big lie. Okay.
Thank you very much. It's a wonderful topic. Really dealing all the sensitive areas of teens. Exactly. Different problems in schoolings and love, sex, crime, and so many topics. I think everything is covered in a very nice and elaborate way in both of you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Wonderful topic. Now Vijayan sir, Vijayan sir, please. Can you do?
Yeah. Thank you both. You just have been miraculous. Are you hearing me?
Yes, sir.
Another thing, you have stopped my brainstorming, total brainstorming happened. Too many things, and I have to think now too much about your class. Yeah, thank you for that. The first thing is even plus what is then only feeling comes, thoughts.
Event plus thoughts equals feelings. Yeah.
Text is an event.
It's a good core thought. I have to work it inside my mind. So this you say that event comes first, then thoughts comes, then comes feelings. So I have to work it inside my mind.
See, your brain's primary goal is to identify threats and protect you from them. So you're always generating thoughts about everything that happens around you, trying to perceive any threats that might exist. And that's sometimes people, it goes a little crazy and you start imagining threats where they don't exist. And then you automatically will plug into emotion. Emotion is designed to help you deal with threats and get what you want and need. So you kind of have this, you're hardwired to have emotion if you perceive a threat. The problem is people too often perceive threats where they don't exist, or magnify ones that do out of proportion to reality because of the thoughts they have about what happens to them, what other people say.
That's agree. What is it? There is an event happened. Okay, then I start thinking, then I feel. So another thing I heard is attitude. Attitude, your own attitude make you feel.
Yeah.
Correct. So where is that event? This is my question now. That is what I want to think inside my net card. Right. Okay.
Well,
attitude for beliefs. Attitude comes from beliefs and some other things are there. That is just you yourself. Okay. There is no event in that.
Yeah, well, thoughts, attitudes, beliefs, those are all, we use those interchangeably. For example, if Dr. Ellis had his ABC theory of emotions, the A stands for activating event, the B stands for your beliefs about yourself, others, life, and what's happening, the activating event, and C is consequences, or what you feel and do as a consequence of what you believe about the event, yourself, others, and life.
There also even comes. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like that formula you learned in math class in high school, A plus B equals C. If A stays the same and you change B, C changes. So if you change your thoughts, beliefs, or attitudes about an event, yourself, others, or life, it changes how you feel and ultimately how you end up behaving. Because there's two things I didn't include today. Attitude is always the father of behavior. So your thoughts always precede your actions, and your feeling or your behavior will tend to follow your emotions or feelings toward your life events or yourself. So, if you're angry, you're going to act like angry people do. If you're depressed, you're going to act like depressed people. So your behavior tends to follow your feelings toward your life events.
Okay, marvelous, I can say. Both of you, marvelous. So what I say is, a lot of time we have to work it up on both of you. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you. Let me just, if I could real quick, here's how we put it. This is based on cognitive affective behavioral therapy. You guys know about CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. My mentor, Doc Downing, is creating a new type of therapy, which is cognitive affective, which adds the affective, the feeling side to the whole thing. And this is how he puts it, is event plus a meaning, which is exactly what Ray said, just said a little bit differently. The event happens, right? Event is a fact, something that happens. We then put meaning on it. We put our beliefs on it. We decide what that means to us or about us. That creates feelings, and then our thoughts and our feelings create our behaviors, right? So we made a little worksheet to do that. What you can do is you put in here what happened to you, what was the event. Then what did you decide about life as a result of that? What did you decide? What's your generalization, as Ray put it? I am, or life is, or the world is, or men are, that kind of thing. They're generalized meanings about what happened, which are our thoughts, Then how did those make you feel? And then what do you do? What did you do with your thoughts and feelings? So that's the top of the event. So here's what happened. Then you can adjust it. You can spin it to win it, as I call it, right? You can then redo those, and you can say same event down the bottom. What happened? Same thing happened, but I could think this about it, or I could put this meaning on it, which will make me feel probably very differently, and therefore I'll act differently based on that. And so this wonderful, this cycle in my opinion, gives us a whole lot of control over our lives. So if you're interested, I can add this into my PowerPoint. We offer the PowerPoints at the end of this. So I'll put this into mine as well. But that's a good point. Ray and I talk about it a little bit differently. We were trained differently, but it's the same stuff. It's the same stuff. Things happen. We then think about it. We then feel what we feel about that, and then we act based on our thoughts and feelings. So yeah. Very important. Most people don't know that. Most people don't know that their feelings are based on their thought, and they don't know that their thoughts can be changed. You don't like it? Change your thought, change your feeling, change your life, right?
Yeah. Great. Have food for thought. We have to work upon it.
There are a couple reasons why it's understandable that we all grow up having an external locus of control and wrongly believing other people make us feel bad. One is because everything processes in our brain so fast that the event seems to be right next to the feeling. It's hard to imagine that there's something in between. There's a step in between. It just goes from this to this so quick. It has to do that because it's about survival in some cases. Now, the other thing is we grow up around people who have an external locus of control. We hear everybody saying that makes me mad, that ticks me off. You know, he's stressing, that stresses me out. We hear people talk like that. So those two reasons that the feeling tends to come so tends to come so fast after an event. Sometimes we're feeling something before people even finish saying what they're going to say. That makes us think it's got to be them causing that, but that's not the way it works. There's a step in between.
Thank you. Great.
Lie, the big lie. I like that, right? The big lie.
So thank you. Anybody else to speak something? Anita ma'am, can you hear?
Okay, sir. Very good class. I think feelings, attitude, and behavior will be differ from one person to another according to their circumstances. From this class, we must mold our good feelings and behavior ultimately. Okay, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So thank you. Anybody else? George sir, can you hear? George, both George are there. Okay, anyway, it's a wonderful class, really touching all the areas related to teens and circumstances or the atmosphere near the school and outside school and even in houses also, personal houses also. So really wonderful. So many things to cover, and very, very essentially about particularly about love and sex also. For love, we feel that it is a feeling, and for sex, it is just an event. So it is very clearly and regarding the yeah. So there is so many areas to cover and really a wonderful talk. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Wonderful.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you. And I was going to apologize again that you had asked us to go slow and we just can't do it. We can't do it. We both talk really fast because there's so much information and we only have an hour and all that. So can't do it. Sorry.
George sir, can you say something?
That point sir has mentioned, Matthias has mentioned, event create this thing, behavior, I think. How to react to that. Of course, it is the attitude of the person that determines how to behave. That may differ. That may differ from person to person. So the reaction may be different. It cannot be uniform. It will, the attitude of Sabu sir may be different from that of mine. So the way in which we react to it is different. So I think that point is also good and correct in our thinking. I mean, they are thinking from their level. It's a foreign country. In Indian thinking also, I think that that concept is good and correct. Thank you, sir.
Actually,
but would you agree that attitude is based on our thoughts, right? Go ahead, Ray. Sorry.
Well, like I said, we use attitude, thoughts, beliefs interchangeably. But what I was going to say is we actually see proof in our everyday life that this is true, that events don't cause feelings, thoughts do, because we see people reacting in much different ways to the same event. Or we see people that have an event that hasn't changed. For example, someone dies, they lose a loved one. And at first they're miserable and grieving, and then months or years later, they've gotten past it. Well, how did they do that? The person is still dead, but they changed their way they think about it or look at it. You know, for example, people will say things like, well, at least he's in a better place now, or at least he's not suffering anymore, or he's with God, or whatever the religious beliefs might be. So we see everyday evidence of the fact that it's really what people think about things that causes how they feel, not what happens. Losing my voice here.
Definitely. Yeah.
So, thank you very much.
Yeah.
I think
Clearly.
everybody has commented. So thank you once again. Tomorrow, what is there for next week for youth? I think it's
Adults.
adults.
But
Yes, adults. Okay. So thank you very much once again. Thank you once again, and we will see you in the next week with the same area but with a different perspective.
Yep.
So
Thank
thank
you.
you. Thank you very much. Really. See you. Thank you and
Bye.
bye.
Bye, Dr. S. Appreciate your time, you guys.
Sure.
Take care. Thanks.